You probably have heard the word virtual many times now. In the computer world, virtualization technology is used by almost 85% of the organizations all over the world. Have you ever thought about how it works? If you want to be in information technology and want your career in programming, data science, cloud, database, or system administration, or any field for that matter, you should have some experience or exposure to virtualization technology. In this course, I will provide you with not only conceptual understanding of virtualization, but also how you can have a virtualization in your home lab and learn from it. You will learn how to install VMware ESXi server, create virtual machines, install operating system on the virtual machines from scratch, manage the VMs, take snapshots, and much more. Hi, my name is Imran Afzal, and I've been in IT for over 20 years now. I have been teaching virtualization and many other IT related courses for years. If you're ready to take your virtualization skills to the next level, then come join me in my LinkedIn learning course. In this video, we are going to learn what is virtualization. So to put it in a very simple words, virtualization is something that is not real or cannot be touched. So you probably have heard many times people talking about I'm working virtually, meaning they're working from home or they're not at the location where the office is. Or you probably hear people say, let's have a virtual meeting, which they will use some kind of a conference, a virtual software conference to meet online. And even nowadays, people are having virtual weddings where you actually don't go to the wedding, but you actually gather online to participate in a wedding. So in computer world, there are virtual computers. Now, what are those virtual computers? In order to understand the virtual computers, we first need to understand how the physical computer works. So let's take an example of a physical computer. For example, you have a desktop or laptop at your work or at home. And let's say if it's a Dell, HP, Sony, or whatever the brand is. So with that physical computer that you have in your possession, you could touch it. And then when you power it on, it actually has an operating system installed. Now that operating system could be Windows, Linux, or Mac. It doesn't really matter. So once that have operating system, then of course you have some kind of applications. Certain applications like Microsoft Excel, Word, you have a web browser to go online. You have certain corporate level applications like DNS, ERP, SAP, PeopleSoft. Those are all the applications. So this is how our actual physical computer works. Now, in terms of resources, so here's a physical system. For example, it has 16 gig of RAM and 4 CPUs. Then you install an operating system, which requires, for example, 4 gig of RAM and 1 CPU of an operating system. Then you install an application, and that application only requires 2 gig of RAM and 1 CPU to run on it. Now, if you count or if you calculate it, 2 gig for operating system, 2 gig for applications, and only 2 CPU, then you basically have 2 gig of RAM and 2 CPUs that resources are underutilized. So what are you going to do with those? Nothing, right? So let's move on to the virtualization. Let's take a look how virtualization can help us solve this issue. So we have a physical server again, which is again Dell or HP or whatever the computer that you have, a physical machine. You have installed a virtualization software on top of that. That could be a VMware software or any other software that provides virtualization layer that sits on top of your physical server. Then you have installed multiple operating systems because this virtualization software will allow you to install not just one operating system, but multiple operating systems. And then these different operating systems can actually host multiple applications running on them. Now let's come to the resource side again. So physical server, again, 16 gig of RAM, 4 CPUs. In the virtualization, let's say we give all those resources to the virtualization layer. Then you're going to put all those different operating systems, as many as you want, of course, depending on your resources. So let's say in this example, we have 4 operating systems and 4 applications running on each operating system. So all of these operating system and application require 4 gig of RAM and 1 CPU each. Now, what would happen when you count them? All of the resources are fully utilized, right? See how, what's the beauty of virtualization? Now, you probably remember in old days, maybe some people still use it, that when they have a dual boot. In dual boot, they have one physical computer, but they have two operating systems installed on it. However, you could run each operating system one at a time. You cannot run both at the same time. With virtualization technology, you could run as many as operating system depending on your resources all at the same time. That's what virtualization is in IT or computer world. In this video, we are going to learn some of the virtualization terminologies that are used in today's IT world. And before you get into virtualization, it is very important that you should get yourself familiar with these terminologies. The very first one that you will often hear is the bare metal server. A bare metal server is a physical server that you could touch, and it has no operating system. So you're gonna get a physical server, which you will have to rack and stack in your data center, and then you will install operating system on it. Then you have a hypervisor. Hypervisor is a virtualization software which is installed on that bare metal server to make it a virtual server. That hypervisor server also referred to as a host or a virtual server. In VMware, that hypervisor is referred to as an ESXi server. Then you have a virtual machine. A virtual machine, in short, a VM. It is also referred to a guest or an instance. A virtual machine is a machine that runs on top of that hypervisor. The hypervisor, since it is referred to as a host, it is hosting the virtual guest. Then we have a virtualization manager. Virtualization manager is the console or a managing tool that manages the hypervisor and virtual machine. In VMware, it is called a vCenter. In Oracle world, it is called OVM Manager or Oracle Virtual Manager. Then you have a virtual desktop, which in short is VDI. You're going to hear that a lot because a lot of corporate employees are nowadays using a virtual desktop, which is given to them by their IT team, which they could access from anywhere. So if you have a laptop and you need to work on something, you have to carry that laptop, right? But in virtual desktop, you could go on any laptop, and if you have your access to your corporate environment, then you could access your VDI session. And that will look exactly the same every time you access it. It is your own given environment. Then moving on, you will hear the word P2E, which is physical to virtual. A physical to virtual is something that you could take the physical server and you virtualize it. Now, a lot of companies are moving from physical to virtual. They have a lot of their operating system or applications running on physical system. So what they are doing is they are virtualizing it. So you're probably going to hear a data center migration. In data center migration, one of the things that you would have to do is physical to virtual migration. Then you have a V2V, virtual to virtual migration. How does it happen? Is if you have an older version of virtualization software running on your virtual machine, you could upgrade it by going through V2V. Then you have VM template. One of the greatest feature of a virtualization is VM template. When you create a VM template, you could actually create or spin a lot of other virtualization machines from VM template because you have a template built on it now. Then you have a snapshot. It's just like a backup, but it's not exactly backup, but it takes the snapshot of your virtual machine right at the moment if you're taking it right now. And for example, a month from now, if you wanted to come back and revert back to that same snapshot, you could do that with a few clicks. Then the last one, you have clone or cloning. Clone is if you have a virtual machine, you could simply copy and paste the exact same virtual machine you have running, which is very, very hard to do in a physical system. So it becomes a lot easier when you have a virtual machine. So these are the few virtualization terms. I'm sure there are a lot more, but the basic ones that you should really need to know before you get into virtualizations are these. In this video, we are going to focus on some of the advantages that virtualization has to offer. The very first one is the cost. Yes, when you do not have to buy so many of computer hardware or other computers to rack and stack them, and you're going to have your computers being virtualized, then the very first thing that you will have is the savings. The cost will go down significantly. That's why a lot of corporate environment, a lot of corporate companies are moving from physical systems to virtualization. Then we have real estate. When we talk about real estate, meaning when you have a lesser number of computer hardware, then of course you need a smaller space to rack and stack them. Compared to having 10 physical servers, you could have one physical server with the required resources, and then you could run 10 different virtual machines on it. That's when you're going to save a lot of money on real estate. Then comes the electricity. Once again, same thing. If you have 10 physical computers running as compared to one physical computer, now you do the math, your electricity bill will go down significantly. Then comes the ease of management. Yes, when you have all the servers all in one single pane of glass, you could actually manage and access all your computers, your virtual machines from one console. And that console is the management tool or management kind of engine that's provided by the virtualization software layer. Then we have the redundancy, meaning lesser downtime. When we have a virtual machine running on one hypervisors, we could actually create a cluster. We could actually create a copy, a backup copy of a virtual machine. So let's say if you have a physical computer, that physical computer somehow it crashes. Now you need a downtime. You need to have a technician on site to replace either CPU, hardware, motherboard, or whatever the issue is. With virtualization, if you're having a problem with a virtual machine, all you have to do is create a new virtual machine or revert back to its snapshot time when you took the snapshot. Then faster deployment of machines. Yes, compared to the physical machine, let's say you have a newer physical machine in your data center. You get it, you racked it, you install the operating system on it. Then you install the application. You go through all the configuration, set up those virtual machines, and then you run it. But with virtual machines, when you have a virtual machine templates, all you have to do is simply few clicks and you will have a brand new virtual machine up and running in no time. Then comes the resource availability. Resources are something that is inside of your computer. If you have a physical machine, the CPU, the memory, the hard disk, and all the peripherals inside of your computer are the resources. So if you have a database administrator in your organization and he comes to you and asks you for more hard disk, then you have very limited resources in a physical box to add hard disk and give it to that person. Whereas in virtualization, if you wanted to give 20 gig, 30 gig, or 500 gig, or whatever that you have available, you could actually add those resources on the fly. Plus, if you have a virtual machine running and its application requirement has increased and you wanted to add additional 4 gig of memory, you could add that on the fly. It's called hot add. Whereas in physical system, it is very hard to add the resources on the fly. You would actually have to open up your physical computer, add memory DIMMs inside of your computer, then start up your computer. Takes a lot of time. Or in some cases, you might have to replace the entire physical hardware to get the resources available or resources that are needed for your application. Now, with virtualization, that has become so easier. All you have to do is simply with a few clicks, you add resources to your virtual machine based on the requirement. Then comes better testing and performance. Virtualization has changed that significantly, especially for developers or software programmers and engineers. They build the programs, applications, they write code, then they test the code. If the code is not working for them, they could change the code, go back for it. Now, if they are doing that on a physical machine and they're changing the code, it is very hard for them to revert back to the original code. With virtualization, let's say if you're writing the first version of the code, you could take a snapshot of your virtual machine right at that point. Then you make changes as you go on. And if you have to come back to the version 1.0, all you have to do is revert back to that snapshot. That's what is better testing and performance as one of the great features of virtualization. Then we have licensing. Of course, when you're going to have a 50 physical machines, you're going to have to pay for 50 physical machine support. You're going to pay for operating system support for every 50 physical machines that are running and application licensing costs. When you are consolidating all of that into virtualized machines, then you have to pay as per the CPU. A lot of companies now licensing their products based on the CPU you are running on your hardware, and that is directly related to the cost. The very first bullet point that we have on this video, it will save you huge, significantly on the licensing cost. And of course, the management piece of it. You don't have to deal with so much licensing and manage those licensing in order to keep the operating system, applications, and whatever the licensing that you need. So here are the few advantages of virtualizations, and I am sure there are a lot more than that, but few of them that I know that I have been working for so long, I could tell right away these are the few advantages that virtualization is a lot better than having a physical machine. In this video, we are going to understand the difference between the virtualization and cloud. Many people feel the cloud and virtualization both are the same, which is not true. So we're going to spend some time and understand the true difference between virtualization and cloud. So virtualization is a software technology, whereas cloud is a remote location somewhere that you don't know, which utilizes the virtualization technology. In simple words, virtualization is a technology and cloud is an environment. Cloud can include physical, virtual, and container computers. So they could have a whole bunch of setup in their data centers consisting of the physical servers, then running the virtual machines. Virtual machine could have multiple virtualization software from different vendors, and it could have many different containers. So that is provided to you as a customer to use it. Whereas virtualization is something that is a software that's sitting on your computer that you could use, or you could create your own cloud if you want to. Let's spend some time and go over some of the visuals so we could have a better understanding of virtualization and cloud. So we have a physical server. On the physical server, we install virtualization software. Then what we do is we create multiple or install multiple operating systems, and then we install applications that are needed to run on those operating systems. Now that could all be in our own data center. So if we have our company, or if we work for XYZ company, that company might be running that physical server, that software, and managing all those operating system. Now they have an IT department or IT team who are responsible for managing the data center, hardware. If something breaks down with the hardware, they have to replace it or call the manufacturer of that hardware to replace it. Then we have an operating system. So the operating system they're running on that data center, whether it's Linux, Windows, or Mac, the IT team of that company XYZ are the one responsible for maintaining and managing or administering that operating system. Then licensing, you have to deal with your own licensing. And then, of course, at the end, you have to manage your own applications that run in that data center. So physical servers are there, then you install the virtualization, but everything is going to be within your own data center. Now let's go to the cloud side. In the cloud side, same thing. They have a physical server, but again, we don't know where they have the data center. Maybe somewhere in the globe that you don't know. And basically, you really don't want to know because you don't really care what kind of physical servers are there or they are running. They have a virtualization software running on their physical servers, just like as if we have our own data center. Then they have their own operating system. They install the operating system and they install the applications. But in this case, they install the application that is needed for them to manage their data centers. The application that what we need as a customer from them is installed by us. So all of this is at the cloud data center, covered with the cloud, of course. Now, in this, what happened is they have the cloud technology people. For example, Amazon Cloud, Oracle Cloud, Azure Cloud, Google Cloud, all those cloud companies that you have heard of, they're running those technologies. So they have their own team who actually manages the data center, the hardware, the operating system, the licensing of everything, except one thing, and that is applications. If they are providing you the service to use their system or their infrastructure, then most likely they will ask you to manage your own application. Yes, if something goes wrong within their environment, let's say the operating system crash or data center or hardware crash, they are the one who are responsible to fix that operating system or the hardware. So this is a very simple and basic difference between virtualization and cloud. Just remember one more time, virtualization is just a software, a technology that you use to create multiple virtual machines. Whereas a cloud consists of the actual somewhere given system to you by a third party for you to use it. Now, you probably heard of another thing, private cloud. Now, private cloud can be implemented within your own data center if you have a different teams that you want to provide resources to or have them manage their own applications. In this video, we will have the introduction of VMware. What is the company about? What it has to offer? VMware Incorporation is an American cloud computing and virtualization technology company headquartered in California, USA. The cloud computing is one of the products that they have in which they run their own hardware, their own operating system, and then you are given an environment to run your application. Whereas virtualization technology is actually a software that you could purchase or license, and then you could install on your bare metal server and manage your own virtual machines and your own infrastructure. VMware was the first commercially successful company to virtualize the x86 architecture in computer world. They were the one who came up with virtualization in 1998. VMware is the leader in virtualization technology and has the most market share even today than anyone else. The second in line is the Microsoft, and they have the virtualization software Hyper-V. VMware virtualization software is called ESXi server, or a generic term is the hypervisor, or that software is the hypervisor. VMware company name is the same as virtualization software technology. Many companies have a different name. For example, Red Hat has a virtualization technology called KVM, but VMware kept its same name as its software or its virtualization technology. Other virtualization companies are Microsoft, who actually also contribute or build a virtualization technology after VMware, and their hypervisor is Hyper-V. Oracle has their own hypervisor. It's called OVM and OLVM. Citrix has Zen Server. Red Hat has KVM. And IBM has its own software, virtualization software as well. So this is a brief introduction to VMware. VMware has many, many different products, but our primary focus for this course is ESXi software virtualization layer. In this video, we will go over the different products or the main products that VMware has to offer. The very first one is the VMware Workstation Player. VMware Workstation Player is an ideal utility for running virtual machines on a Windows, Linux, or Mac computers. Organizations or corporate environments use Workstation Player to deliver managed corporate desktops or VDIs, while students and educators use it for learning and training purposes. There is also a free version available for non commercial, personal, and home use. Then we're moving on to the VMware vSphere hypervisor, which is the main engine that is called ESXi by VMware. It is installed on bare metal server. So bare metal hypervisor that installs directly onto your physical server. Then we have a VMware vSphere client. It is an interface that allows you to connect to your hypervisor. So you have a physical machine, you install the ESXi software on top of that physical machine. Now, how do you access that machine or how do you access that software? You need some kind of client to connect to that software, and that software client is called vSphere client. It is a client just like RDP, which is remote desktop protocol software that uses Windows, Microsoft Windows, or a PuTTY or Terraterm terminal that you could use to access Linux servers remotely. Then it is now the client itself is now based on a web browser. You could access that client by putting the IP address of your ESXi server hypervisor in the client, which is based as HTML5. The older version of that client was a thick client, meaning you had to download from VMware website and install the thick client. Then you would simply double click on the icon and then it will ask you for the IP address, username, and password. Once provided, then it will connect you to the ESXi server. Now you're probably thinking, hey, when we have a bare metal server and we install ESXi server, then we don't actually have any information of that ESXi server configuration or IP address for that matter. Yes, that is true. So for that, when you install the ESXi software on bare metal server, then you actually have to use either console port of the physical server or a crash cart with a laptop or a monitor and connect it directly to your physical server and go through the installation of the ESXi. When you go through the installation, then it will ask you for IP address, for its a host name, and all the information that you would need to access that ESXi software layer remotely. Then another software, which is one of the most important software that is used in corporate world, is VMware vCenter. It is a management tool to manage multiple hypervisors. The interface is the same, just like as a vSphere client, but with added functionality. So when you have a one ESXi server and you need to access that ESXi server, you don't really need a VMware vCenter license. All you need is a free vSphere client, open up your browser and access the ESXi server. Now, what if you have multiple ESXi server? You're creating a cluster. You're getting bigger in a bigger environment. You're scaling up your environment. You have thousands of virtual machines running in that environment. Then you need a sophisticated tool to manage your environment. And for that purpose, you are given the VMware vCenter. You have to purchase the license to run in that your environment. In this video, we are going to talk about our lab design and what are the prerequisites to set up that lab. Now, in a corporate world or in an ideal world, if you are working in an IT firm or if you're working in an IT department of any company, all you have to do is find a computer hardware which is bare metal with no operating system, minimum requirement of RAM 4 gig, 2 CPU, and disk of at least 200 gig. Then what you will do, you will install the virtualization hypervisor. In VMware, it is called ESXi, and the version you could install 7, which is the most recent, latest one at this time. For that hypervisor, the requirement is the RAM should be at least 4 gig, at least 2 CPU, The disk requirement is at least 200 gig. Now, please note up to 138 gig that is given to the hypervisor is dedicated for ESXi only. You cannot use the entire 200 gig. If you give it to the virtual hypervisor, you cannot give it that for the virtual machines. Why? The reason is that the virtualization hypervisor ESXi 7.0 version, up to 138 gig of storage will be utilized for ESXi, for VMware Tools Locker, Core Dump, and Scratch Partition. So if you are setting up 100 gig for the virtualization hypervisor, you are not going to see the storage at all. So it's better you dedicate at least 200 gig. You could also attach external storage as well. Anyway, once you have that virtualization layer software installed, just as if you would install an operating system on a computer, then you could go and spin up your virtual machines directly on your virtualization hypervisor. The virtual machines could be either Windows, Linux, or any of your own choice. Now, for you to access that virtualization hypervisor layer, all you need is another computer with the browser, and then you will access it by entering the IP address of that hypervisor. Now, that's an ideal world. In a corporate world, that's how a hypervisor, vSphere hypervisor, is installed and set up. Now we are going to talk about our home environment, because in our home environment, we do not have enough resources to spare. We do not have a hardware laying around or additional resources that we could use. So we have to use what we have with limited resources. So for our home environment, or in this entire course, our lab, what we will do is we will have our own computer, meaning if you have a laptop, if you have your personal computer, anything that you have that you use, you could use that to set up your VMware lab. How it's going to work is, of course, your laptop, for example, has a minimum of 4 gig RAM, which I'm sure everyone nowadays have a 4 gig. I would recommend at least 8 gig, but let's say if you have minimum of 4 gig. You gotta have at least 2 CPU, and disk space for your laptop or PC that you're using should be at least 100 gig free. Then you have an operating system running on your laptop, right? And that operating system could be either Windows, Linux, or Mac. Now, with that setup, I'm sure every one of you has this setup at your home. Then what we will do on top of that operating system, we will install some kind of virtualization software, a smaller virtualization software. So the reason we do that is because we don't have to remove the operating system from our computer. So what we will do is we will install virtualization software, and that virtualization software is the VMware Workstation Player. Or you could use another virtualization software by Oracle. It's called Oracle VirtualBox. For those of you who has Mac M1 chip computers, you might not be able to install Workstation Player or Oracle VirtualBox. You would have to install UTM software, which also provides you the virtualization layer over your Mac computer. Once you have that virtualization software installed, then we will install the virtualization hypervisor ESXi version 7.0. And this will be, or it's called, a nested environment, meaning hypervisor within a hypervisor. The reason we are doing that is because, once again, we have limited resources. So whatever we have to work through it. So we will install the virtualization hypervisor, and please keep in mind that virtualization software is given to you only for 60 days. That's a 60 days evaluation. After that, some of the functionality will not work. So my preference is that you finish the course within 60 days. Now for this virtualization hypervisor, once again, the requirement is 4 gig of RAM minimum, CPU 2 at least. ESXi disk space requirement is 200 gig. Once again, out of that 200 gig, up to 138 gig is reserved for its own ESXi tools. If we are signing 200 gig, we will be given only 60 or 70 gig available for our virtual machines that we will be creating on top of that virtualization layer. You could also attach additional storage. If you have, let's say, a flash drive or external storage, you could create a new data store, which we will cover later on. But for now, please pay close attention. Right here, this box is the lab design we will be following for this course. In this video, we will go through the download and install of VMware Workstation Player. VMware Workstation Player is a virtualization layer that will run over our operating system, and then we will install ESXi server, another virtualization hypervisor over it. It will be a nested environment. So first thing is that we need to find out which laptop or PC that we will use to set up our lab. I have already identified my computer that I will be using, and on top of that, we have our operating system. I know in my environment, I have a Windows 10 operating system running, and I'm sure you know which operating system you have running as well. One thing you do have to make sure is the resource requirement, and that is you gotta have at least 4 gig of RAM. You gotta have 2 CPUs or 1 CPU with dual core, and you gotta have the disk requirement, which is the minimum of 100 gig free that you should have. I have identified them. I have made sure I have the right resources. If you do not know how to get to it, how to find them, stay with me. I'll show you in a minute. Once we have that operating system, identify the resources, then we will go ahead and download and install the virtualization software. The virtualization software that I am going with is VMware Workstation Player version 16, and which is the most recent, latest version as of today. Okay, so now first thing first, we will go and verify the resources that we have for our system, that, or if it suffices the requirement. First thing is the RAM. Go to your search bar, type computer information and hit enter, and it will open up this box, the Windows box. Right here it will tell you the installed memory is 32 gig. I have 32 gig, which means I have a lot more than 4 gig, so I suffice the requirement of minimum of 4 gig. The operating system I have running is Windows 10. Now the two things that left is processor and disk. Right here, you could tell the type of processor, but you cannot tell if it is 1 or 2 processor. For that, you go to your taskbar right at the bottom, right click on Task Manager, go to Performance, and right here in the Performance, you will see your CPU and other resources information. Right here on the CPU, if you move your cursor right here and look closely, you'll see the sockets 1, core 4, which means I have 1 times 4 equal 4 processors. So I suffice the requirement of CPU. You gotta have at least 2 CPU, meaning at least 1 socket and at least 2 cores. All right, the next thing is we need to make sure we have enough disk space. For that, I'll go back to the search and type this computer or this PC. Click on it, and it will open up all your devices and drives. Right here on Windows, a C drive, I have total of 475 gig of disk, out of which 185 gig are free. Okay, perfect. So I suffice that requirement as well. So RAM, which is memory, CPU, and disk space requirement have been met for me. I want you to go through your operating system, make sure you have the right resource requirement. Okay, once that is met, close everything out. Now let's go to our favorite browser, or whichever the browser that you wanted to pick. I wanted to go to my Firefox and go to any search engine of your choice and simply type download VMware Workstation Player. Or you could go straight to the VMware website and look for it, but I find it a lot easier if you know exactly what you're looking for. All right, the very first link is download VMware Workstation Player. Beautiful. Click on it. And VMware Workstation 16 Player, this is what we need, which is the most recent version as of now. Try Workstation 16 Player for Windows and try Workstation 16 Player for Linux. Now, I know I have confirmed that I'm running Windows. So I will go ahead and click on download now and save the file. Once file is saved, the browser up here, you see right here, it's showing up the progress. When the progress is done, I could just open this up and it says completed, and I could run it right from here or go to the folder where the file is saved. But I could run it from here, click on it. Do you want to allow this app to make changes to your device? That's fine. And just verified publisher, which is VMware Incorporation. Great. We would know that is running that VMware workstation. Click yes. Workstation player starting the installation. Let's minimize it. And let's wait for the installation wizard to start. Welcome to the VMware Workstation 16 Player Setup Wizard. To Setup Wizard will install Workstation Player. Click Next to continue or cancel to exit the setup. I'm sure you are very familiar with the installation wizard of a software, so simply follow the prompts. Click Next. Terms and User License Agreement. Go through it if you want to. Click on I accept the terms in license agreement. Click Next. Install where it will install. This is the default location. I will leave it as is. Enhanced keyboard driver, a reboot will be required. Just leave it out. Add VMware Workstation console tools into system path. Leave everything default. Click Next. Check for updates on startup. I don't want that. It's just a lab for now. That's fine. Join the VMware customer experience. That's fine. Let's uncheck. Click Next. Create shortcuts desktop and start menu. That is fine. Next. Ready to install and install. Completed the VMware Workstation 16 Player Setup Wizard. Click Finish, or if you wanted to enter the license, you can enter it now. But for now, just click Finish. All right, so once this is finished, it will create an icon right here. This is the downloadable software. You could delete it now. Now you could access the VMware Workstation by double clicking here or go to the search bar and typing it VMware Workstation Player 16 and simply click on it and it will open up the application. Right here it says VMware Workstation 16. Use VMware Workstation 16 Player for free for non-commercial use, or enter a license key to allow commercial use. We are using for non-commercial use because we are using it for training, only for the learning purposes. So simply leave this as is and click continue and finish. And there you have the console for the VMware Workstation Player. Right here on top, it says non-commercial use only. This will remain as is, but it doesn't matter. It will give you all the functionality you need, except a few of them, but that functionality you don't need for this course. All right, so in here, you have the options: creating virtual machines, open a virtual machine if you already have one up and running, upgrade to VMware Workstation Pro, or if you need any online help. You could also get a lot of menu access from player dropdown, and you could go through each one of them one by one. Most of them will be available right now. As you could see, they are grayed out. Is because you do not have any virtual machine created. You will see most of them set up or showing up after our first virtual machine is created. In this video, we will download the ESXi software and create our very first virtual machine on VMware Workstation Player. Once again, the ESXi server or the ESXi software is a VMware software that provides virtualization and allow you to run multiple virtual machines. And that is something we should have a great understanding by now. So what are the steps we will take? The very first step is we will download the vSphere ESXi version 7. Now, what is vSphere, which is right next to the ESXi? vSphere is basically an environment. When we download and install ESXi server, we need to access that, right? When we access that, we are given a portal, our interface, an environment. That environment is called vSphere. So that is why vSphere is always associated with ESXi, or ESXi is associated with vSphere. And vSphere client, as I said before, the client was something that is needed to access that ESXi environment. All right, to download that, you could simply go to vmware.com, click on resources, then product download, all products, then VMware vSphere, and then you could click on view download components. Once you click on that, you will need a username and password on VMware to download it. Now, you do not need a corporate account. You could just create your own simple, regular personal account with personal email, and then you could download that. Or you could simply search online and type it in download VMware ESXi 7, and it will take you straight to that page. Next thing is we will create our new virtual machine on our VMware workstation player. Pay close attention, not on ESXi, but on our workstation, because we are creating a nested environment. The minimum requirement for the ESXi, which will be installed on that virtual machine, is 4 gig of RAM, 2 CPU, and minimum of 100 gig free space. We will create or assign 200 gig of disk space. Why? Because when we create a 200 gig, it doesn't mean it will take away all the 200 gig right away from your computer. It will only take away 5 or 10 gig, and it will increase as you create more machines. That is called thin provisioning. If you wanted to create the 100 gig and you wanted to take away right away everything, all the disk space, that is called thick provisioning. Anyway, we will go through the VMware thin provisioning, which will only take what it is needed. Then we will attach the ESXi ISO image, and we will create the virtual machine. All right, without further ado, let's go open up your browser and download the vSphere ESXi version. You could go to any search bar and type it in download VMware ESXi 7. Right here it says download VMware vSphere hypervisor for free. It will bring you down right here, license and download. Please log in or create an account to access VMware vSphere hypervisor license and downloads. So I'm going to click on login because I have already an account. I have logged in. Now the download. VMware vSphere hypervisor ESXi ISO image right here. This is the one we need to download. The total size is 390 meg, which is not much. So you could click on manually download and save where you want to save, default location, wherever you have it. Make sure you know where that default location is. All right, so once that is downloaded, it should be pretty fast. Now, the next step is create the virtual machine and attach this image to that virtual machine. So we'll go to our VMware workstation player right here, which we created as a first virtualization layer. Okay, let's click on create a new virtual machine. Install from installer disk, DVD. Nowadays, very few people use DVD drives, so we know we're not going to go there because we downloaded the ISO image. So right here it says installer disk image ISO. Click on it and specify where you have the downloaded image. So if I browse it, go to my desktop, right here, as you can see on the left-hand side, this is where I have my ESXi hypervisor downloaded. So I'm going to select that and click open. All right, as soon as you specify the downloadable ISO image, you will see right here, it will detect itself. It says VMware ESXi 7 and later detected. Beautiful. Click next. The virtual machine name. This is the name which will be given to the virtual machine, which will show up in your list right here. This is not the host name of the software or the operating system. So I will just keep it very simple and short. I will call it ESXi 1. And location, if you want to change the location, you can, but I will leave it default. Next. All right, right here, the disk space. Remember, I told you got to have at least 100 gig of your primary host of this computer. So by default, it needs 142 gig. So I'm going to change it to 200. Even though my computer does not have a free 200 gig, I'm going to give it 200 gig because it will not take the entire 200 gig right away. So give it 200 gig and then click on Store Virtual Disk as a single file. Next. All right, let's check the resources that we have assigned: the name, location, version, operating system, hard disk 200 gig, memory 4 gig by default, network adapter, NAT, that's fine, leave it default. Other devices, 2 CPU cores, perfect. Power on this virtual machine after creation. You don't have to power on, just leave it off for now and finish. Excellent. You see, our first virtual machine is created, and that virtual machine will be used to install ESXi software. In this video, we are going through the installation and configuration of ESXi software. So the steps we will take in this entire video is: the very first thing, we'll go to our VMware Workstation player, and we will power up the virtual machine that we created in the last video. That has already attached our ESXi image to it. Once that is powered on, then it will go through the installation wizard. So we just have to follow the installation wizard. You could go through with me every step of the way, and then we will provide all the required configuration setting to complete the ESXi installation. And then that will be the completion of our entire VMware lab setup. So let's go. Let's start up our VMware Workstation player. All right, here is our ESXi server, or our virtual machine that we created. Now go ahead and click on Play Virtual Machine. You could do it from here, or you could just simply click from here as well. Both will perform the same functionality. Okay, you see right here, since we had our ESXi image attached to this VM, it automatically picked up and it started loading the ESXi installer. Welcome to VMware ESXi version installation. VMware version installed on most systems, but only systems on VMware's capability guide are supported. So if you wanted to know what is supported, you could go to this URL and find the compatibility guide. Anyway, just simply click inside of this window and then hit enter. Now, one thing you should know that right now, if you click inside of this window, your cursor is captured inside. So if you wanted to release that, you would have to press Control and Alt to release your cursor. But in order to go through the prompts, you have to stay captured inside. So right here, it says VMware End User License Agreement. Just click F11, accept and continue. And if you want to go through and read through it, also do that. After that, you click F11. All right, select a disk to install or upgrade. You will see the local disk that is selected is 200 gig. Now, in our last video, we carved 200 gig we given to our virtual machine. That same 200 gig has been detected, and that's what it's showing, and it's just asking you to confirm. It is confirmed, so simply hit enter. Please select a keyboard type, US default for me. Enter the root password. You have to specify and create a root password. Make sure you remember it. Confirm. And hit enter to continue. All right, CPU in this host may not be supported in future ESXi releases. Please plan accordingly. That is fine for now because we are going through the lab setup. So hit enter. the installer is configured to install the ESXi version 7. Warning, this disk will be repartitioned. That is fine. Don't be scared. This is not going to repartition your main operating system disk. So hit F11 to install. All right, the installation has been completed successfully. Remove the installation media before rebooting. That's fine. Just hit enter. The server will shut down and reboot. The process will take a short time. Now, remember, if you are in a corporate environment and you are going through the installation of ESXi directly on your bare metal server, this is exactly what you will go through it. You do not have to install the VMware Workstation Player part. You will go through the installing this directly on your bare metal server. All right, so the ESXi server installed, completed, and now we got the installation and the system rebooted and back online. Look at it right here. It says VMware ESXi 7.2. Verify the version. 2 times Intel Core. This is 2 CPU and 4 gig of memory. To manage this host, go to https: and the IP address. This is a DHCP IP address. Now, right now I have this IP. If I come back to it tomorrow, perhaps it might change because DHCP IP always change. That is why in corporate environment, they assign static IP. So every time you have to go to your ESXi server, make sure it has the right IP. Then right here it says customize system or view logs. So let's go through the customization. Click inside of your console window, hit enter. Now hit F2. It will ask you to provide the login root password. All right, so we are in the setup mode. Configure password if you want to change it. Configure management network. That is where if you want to assign a static IP or if you want to assign the host name as well. So let's say I clicked on it. And then if I go to IPv4 configuration, you'll see it has the IP address. That is where I could change the IP address. So I don't want to change it. I want to leave it DHCP, but I do want to change the host name. So I'll go to DNS. Right here in the DNS configuration, I see a host name right here. So I will pick this option and I will select the bottom one where it says use the following DNS server addresses and host names. So once you move your cursor down, hit the space bar to select. And then come down. By default, it has a host name localhost. I want to change it to ESXi1. This is the same name. I want to keep it what I gave it to my virtual machine. You could change it to whatever you want. And if you're in a corporate environment, you could assign a host name based on your host naming standards. Now hit OK. And at the bottom, you'll see you have to exit and you hit escape for it. Press escape. And it will say apply changes and restart management network. Hit Y for yes and N for no. So Y. Changes applied, you will see the host name has been applied as well. So if you wanted to restart the management network, you could do it. And all the other configuration that is needed for your ESXi server can be done right here. Now, this is where the installation of ESXi completes. We will never come back to this portal unless we have to change the network information of your ESXi. Everything from this point on, in order to create a virtual machines, to manage the ESXi server, anything that you want to do will be done through the vSphere environment. And that vSphere environment is browser-based. You could open up your browser, enter the IP address, and it will pull up the ESXi server setting. In this video, we are going to learn how we could access our ESXi server through a vSphere web client environment. Now, if you have a Windows machine and you've been working with the Windows and you wanted to access it remotely, what do? You actually open up a remote desktop connection on your computer, and in short, it's called RDP. You input the IP address of your Windows computer that you want to access remotely, and you click on connect, and it allows you to connect that machine. Now, what if you want to connect to a Linux machine? Similarly, you gotta have a client, and that client you could use either PuTTY or Secure CRT, or there are many other clients that are available online that you could download and connect it. Now comes our ESXi server. We need to access that ESXi server, and for that, we need Internet Browser. You could choose any internet browser of your choice that is compatible with the VMware ESXi version that you are accessing. Now, you're probably thinking, hey, 1 second. Didn't we install the ESXi server and we can actually access it and we could view it through the console? Yes, you are right. You could access the console, but to perform the real operations of ESXi vSphere environment, you need to access it through a browser. Now, the older version of ESXi server, you had to download and install a vSphere thick client. Thick client, it's called thick because you have to download and install it, which stays on your computer. You have to go double click on it and you run it, and then you input the IP address, and then it actually connects to it. Now, with the newer version of ESXi server, there's no need to install the client. All you have to do is open up your web browser, enter the IP address of your ESXi server, and you will have access. All right, so the very first thing we have to do is to find out what is the IP address of our ESXi server, right? But before we go there, one more further step. Do we have our ESXi server up and running? Great question. Now, first, we need to find out by going to our ESXi server console. So I already have my ESXi console open right here. Okay, this is the console of my ESXi server. And if you look closely, or if you want to click inside, it will turn a different color to yellow. You'll notice right here, let me exit out and so I could get my mouse back. You notice right here, this is the IP address of your ESXi server. You need to make sure you're getting the correct IP address, especially if you have restarted your ESXi server, and since it's getting its IP from DHCP, it could change. So we have confirmed it's 192.168.179.128. Of course, it might be different on your computer depending on what network you are on. All right, so now we know the IP. Let's open up our browser. I'm going to use Firefox, and I'm going to enter the IP address. Once again, the IP address right here is 192.168.179.128. Now simply hit enter, and there you have it. They'll welcome the login screen for the VMware. All right, enter the username, which is root. That's the same username and password that you created when you were going through the installation and configuration of an ESXi server. Go ahead and input your password. Okay, now you have the actual vSphere environment access. This is your ESXi server. This is the name that we gave to our ESXi server when we went through the installation. This is the version 7.0 update 2. The state is normal, and the uptime, how long it's been up for. And you will get all the other hardware information pertaining to that ESXi server. The manufacturer is VMware Inc. Why? Because we are running on the VMware workstation player. The CPU we have assigned, the memory, the disk, the IP address, and the storage right here. You could get all the information about your vSphere environment. Once again, this portal that you see, it's called a vSphere environment. This is vSphere. Okay, right here you see you are currently using ESXi in evaluation mode. This license will expire in 60 days. Yes, so whatever the testing or lab setup that we are doing, we need to make sure we learn and do all our practices within 60 days, because this is an enterprise level computer and server that you are running in your lab. All right, and if you go around, you're going to see this is where you're going to create virtual machines. This is the storage you have. This is where you could change your networking. This is if you wanted to manage your hardware where the ESXi is running. If you wanted to put any kind of monitoring on your ESXi server, you'll do it right here. There are a lot of other options that are available. So please go ahead and try every option that you see here in the setting and changing password or refresh, try one by one. Get yourself familiar with ESXi vSphere environment. In this video, we are going to learn how we could access our ESXi server through SSH. Now, to go over again the different accesses that we did previously, you notice that we have ESXi server console access when we did the download and installation of our ESXi server. And the screen looked like split into yellow and gray, and we gain access through VMware Workstation Player. So you connect to it through our VMware Workstation Player. That's one of the access. By the way, that only gives you the console access. It does not give you the whole a lot of functionality a vSphere client gives you. So if you need a vSphere client access, then you need internet browser. Of course, a compatible internet browser. You type it in the IP address of your ESXi server, and you get the login screen, provide the credentials, and you're in. From this ESXi vSphere environment, you could perform many different functions, creating virtual machines, creating storage, networking, and so on. You cannot do the exact same thing through the ESXi console. Now, the third type of access that we will cover now is accessing ESXi vSphere, and that has to be done over SSH, and you would need some kind of SSH client like PuTTY or Secure CRT or any client of your choice that allows you to connect over SSH. Now, you're probably thinking, isn't SSH access or connection is needed for a Linux type of operating system? Yes, if that's what you're thinking, then you are absolutely right. The reason we are connecting or ESXi allows us to connect over SSH is because it runs on Linux. Yes, the underneath, under the hood of ESXi server, it's actually a Linux kernel. Now, a lot of people can argue that it's not exactly a full-blown Linux operating system. That's fine, I agree to it, but it is a modified version, changed version, or proprietary version that is only exclusive to VMware. But anyway, it does have some Linux inside, and that's what we're going to connect to so we could run certain commands that can be used or that can be run through vSphere environment. All right, so the first thing is we have confirmed that this is the access that we get. This is the vSphere console access. The third type of access is our vSphere access through our web browser, which runs over HTML5 technology. And now the third type of access that we need is SSH. And for SSH, we have to enable SSH because by default, the SSH is disabled to log in, and that's for security purposes. There are two ways you could enable SSH. One is that you go to Actions tab right here, go to Services, and click on Enable Secure SSH. And this is going to enable it. And every time you log into ESXi server, it's going to tell you SSH is enabled on this host. You should disable SSH unless it is necessary for administrative purposes. That's one way. Another way to enable SSH is through this console. Hit enter inside, hit F2, provide the password of your root account. Then you come down to where it says troubleshooting option. Hit enter. And the second one where it says disable SSH. See, we have enabled it through our vSphere web client. And that's why it is giving us the option on the left side to disable it. And on the right side, it is giving us the current status, which is SSH is enabled. So anyway, you could do from either side. So in order for you to connect to ESXi through SSH, you need a PuTTY client or secure CRT client. I already have downloaded and installed a PuTTY client. If you have not, you could go ahead and download. It's a free software. It takes literally less than 1 minute to install it. Then you come back to the screen, hit escape to go back to the main screen. You have the IP address right in front of you. Perfect. Now you need is your PuTTY client. So if you have it installed, all you have to do is simply type PuTTY in your search bar and it will open up your PuTTY terminal. You enter the IP address that you see right here, 192.168.179.128, and then make sure the port is 22 and it is connection type SSH. You could save that for later, but I'll say leave it as is and click open. If you are opening or connecting to your ESXi server for the very first time, then you will get a message, a security message that will tell you, do you accept the risk to connect to this machine if you don't know? You could simply say yes. Since I'm connecting to the second time, that's why you don't see it, that it's popping up here. Anyway, you're going to get the login, and that is root, the same root user credentials. And there you have it. You could increase the font size or increase the window depending on the client that you're using. So here you could run all those simple Linux commands like which directory you are in. You could type pwd, and I'm sure people who are familiar with Linux can relate to it right away. And you could do ls command to see which files and directories are in there. You could use the cd command and to go into, for example, var directory. To change the directory, you could do pwd. It will tell you which directory you are in. You could run esx top command, which will be exactly the same as you would run top command in Linux. And it will give you the information of your processes that are running in your ESXi server. You could exit out of this by simply hitting Q and you'll get your prompt back. All the commands that you need in order to manage your vSphere environment, that all the options that you have available right here in your vSphere environment, all these options can be managed or run through that ESXi SSH client to the command line. And for that, you have to use the command ESXCLI. And when you hit enter, you're going to see all the other options that's available that comes with this command. For example, you want to know ESXCLI system. So you could type that option, hit enter, and it will give you additional option that's available with that option. And let's say you want to know the system time, which is right here. It'll tell you, and hit enter, and it will give you the time and additional two options. For example, get time or set time. You could change the time from here too, but we could just simply get time to see what time is it right now on our ESX server. There are many different commands that you could get yourself familiar to, but please do not run any commands that you do not know or you get proper documentation and read about it. So that's pretty much about it. We covered all three access to ESXi, one through console, one through the vSphere client, and one through SSH. In this video, we are going to learn how we could create a new virtual machine on our vSphere environment. To recap where we are at this point, let's start back again from our home environment. So we have our home environment, our computer hardware, a bare metal server. You're probably doing this whole lab on a desktop or a laptop. And on top of your laptop or desktop, you have an operating system running. And the operating system could be Windows, Mac, and Linux, which we have already talked about, right? Then we installed a virtualization software layer, which allows us to have an embedded virtualization. So the virtualization software that we had the option of is either Workstation Player, Oracle VirtualBox, UTM for Mac, M1 computers. So for this lab, we are going with Workstation Player. All right, so once that was done, we went ahead and we installed the hypervisor, the virtualization hypervisor, version 7, and that is for 60 days evaluation. It is done, and we accessed that hypervisor through different means. We know how to access it, especially on the vSphere environment. Now it's time to go ahead and create the virtual machines. And for this lab or this course, we are going to create one virtual machine, and that would be on Linux. Why I'm picking Linux? No particular reason. You could pick Windows or any other operating system of your choice. But for my personal reasons, the Linux takes less system resources, RAM, CPU, and hard disk, and easier and a lot easier to go through the installation. So it's just a matter of explaining you how a virtual machine can be created and how we can install an operating system on it. All right, so let's go right into our vSphere environment and let's start creating a virtual machine. All right, the very first thing you need to make sure is you have your ESXi server, which is up and running. If you do not have it up and running, go ahead and start it up. Now go ahead and start your browser. Again, any browser of your choice. I'm going with Firefox. All right, once it's started, go ahead and type it in the IP address of your ESXi server. So you could minimize it or make the window smaller. All right, type it in 192.168.179.128. All right, that will take you straight to the ESXi vSphere login credentials. Put in the username root and your root password. All right, you're in. Awesome. Now, the exercise is that we are going to create a virtual machine on vSphere environment. And right away, you could tell here is the option to create a virtual machine. So you could go to host, right click on the host, and you could create register virtual machine from here as well. Now, vSphere environment allows you to perform any specific function from many different areas, from many different navigation bars. So let's go through this virtual machine on the navigation bar right here. Click on it, and it will give you on the right hand side, it will give you the option. So the very first option is to create. You don't see console, power on, power off, because there is no virtual machine as of yet. So let's go ahead and click on create our first virtual machine. Excellent. Now we are in the select creation type, the wizard. How would you like to create a virtual machine? Create a new virtual machine, deploy a virtual machine from OVA or OVF file, which means if you already have a virtual machine running on a different environment, you could import that. That's pretty much what it is asking you. Register an existing virtual machine. If you create a virtual machine, you can unregister from the vSphere environment, but it stays on the disk. And if you want to bring it back on the vSphere environment, then you have to register it. So, of course, we're doing it for the very first time, so we'll create a new virtual machine. The name of the virtual machine. As I said, we're going to pick Linux, so just type Linux 1. This is the name of the virtual machine, not the operating system host name. All right, compatibility. ESXi, which is our ESXi version, leave that as is. Guest OS family. Select the guest OS family. We are picking up Linux. Guest OS version. So now, which version or distribution, more specifically, we wanted to install on this virtual machine? I'm going with CentOS 8 right here. You could go with any of the flavor of your choice. Again, there is no any specific reason of picking any operating system. is just a matter of explaining you and making you understand how a virtual machine can be created and how we could install an operating system on it. So we'll go with CentOS 8 64-bit. Click next. All right, data store. So you need to identify from where are you going to assign the storage to this virtual machine. Now, by default, we only have one data store. If you are working in a corporate environment, I'm sure you will see multiple data stores. And based on your database administrator, you could pick the data store that is assigned for your virtual machines. Anyway, keep it default. Click next. The resource assignment. CPU 1, that's fine. Memory 2048, which is equal to 2 gig. You could change that to 2 gig or in gig, and it will change it to 2 as well, and then type in 2 here. It's the same thing. Hard disk size 16 gig. Well, let's pick 20 gig, just a little higher. That's fine. And then these are the controller of your storage, network adapter, and the host. This is where you are getting the ISO image. We haven't downloaded the ISO image, so we will leave that as is for now. Video card, leave everything default. Click next. Verify it before you click on finish. Okay, we have everything is good. There aren't any issues. However, you could change the resources like CPU and memory later on, but you cannot change the hard disk. I mean, technically you can, but you have to go through the operating system tools to extend the existing hard disk, which could be cumbersome. So that's why pick the right hard disk. For Linux, 20 gig is enough. So go ahead and click finish. Right here on top, it says virtual machine Linux 1 was successfully created. And at the bottom, every time you run a task in vSphere environment, it shows up in recent task right here, create virtual machine. And by the way, it will go away. But if you wanted to check the logs or recent task, you could always get that information from the vSphere logs as well. Okay, so here is your virtual machine that's been created. When you select on this virtual machine, you will see it will give you the information about the virtual machine, the resource that are assigned to it, the name of it, and you get a few extra option right here, which is power on. When you click on power on, it will start up, but it will nothing but an empty black shell, because that empty shell doesn't have any operating system. So the next step for us is to download the operating system, attach that ISO image to this virtual machine, and then go through the installation of that operating system. Now, since we powered it on, we could go to the console by clicking the console right here, and you get different options for the console. Open browser console, meaning it will open right here. Open console in a new window, meaning it will create a console in a completely new web browser window. Open console in a new tab. I'm sure you know what the new tab is right here. Launch remote console and download vMRC. So in order to use launch remote console, you will need to have the client vMRC. So let's start with open console right here. Right here, you see it is telling you attempting to start. So it is just like as if you are in a BIOS mode because it doesn't have any operating system image attached. So that is something we have to do it next. So in this video, once again, to recap, we learned how to create a virtual machine on vSphere environment. In this video, we are going to cover how we could download and install the operating system on vSphere virtual machine. Going back to our home environment or lab setup, we have identified the laptop or a desktop that we are using, which is running some kind of operating system, most likely Windows or Mac OS. And then we install the virtualization software. In our case, we installed the VMware Workstation Player. Then we installed and created a virtual machine on top of that virtualization software. And then on that virtual machine, we installed virtualization hypervisor, which is ESXi version 7. Then we went ahead and created a virtual machine. Now, think of yourself a technician or an employee of, for example, Dell or HP, and you are assigned to work on an assembly line where the computer passes by on a conveyor belt. You are responsible to add the resources. For example, you adding the CPU, the memory, the hard disk, and all the devices, all the parts inside of a computer. Now, that is for the actual physical computer. Now, just like that, you were working on assembly line, but this time you were working as on a virtual machine. You are not working in a factory. You had your own factory on your own lab setup where you created a virtual machine. You added the RAM, you added the CPU, you added the hard disk. So it works just like that. The only difference is that one you have to work in a factory, physically touch the computer and add the resources. Whereas in this one, you don't have to touch anything. Everything is virtual. All right. So now the virtual machine is there. What's next? Now, let's go and install an operating system. And we picked the Linux operating system because it's a lot easier and faster to go through the installation. Before we install the Linux operating system, we have to download its ISO image. So for that, we have to go to its website, which is centos.org. So go ahead and open up your browser. Type it in centos.org. Go to downloads. There are two options you will see: CentOS Linux, CentOS Stream. Leave the CentOS Linux. Go to x86_64 bit architecture. Click on it. It will bring you to this page, which has a lot of mirrors, meaning where you could download the ISO image from. You could pick any mirror, go with the first one. And then from this page, you have to download the one that says x64-dvd1.iso. And you're probably going to notice that it has the largest size. Once you click on it, it will ask you to save the file. To save the time, I have already saved the file in one of my folders. So depending on your computer speed, depending on your internet speed, it could take anywhere between a minute to 5 minutes to download the file. So I have already downloaded, so I'm going to cancel it out. I have downloaded in my ISO folder. It is there. Once you start downloading, you will see the progress right here, again, depending on the browser that you're using. So now it's time that you go to your vSphere environment and attach this ISO image on your virtual machine to do or start the installation. All right, let's minimize this. Let's go to our workstation, VMware workstation, which has our ESXi running. ESXi server IP 192.168.179.128. Let's go ahead and enter that in. All right, we got the credential login screen. Put in the username and password to log in. Okay, go to virtual machines. Here we have our virtual machine. Click on it. Do not power on yet. Right click, go to edit settings, and then come down where you have CD, DVD drive, and right here where you see host device, you need to select the drop down and select data store ISO image. Now, data store ISO image is the data store itself that we have. That, remember, we added 200 gig. That's the same data store. So what is it asking you to do is to pick your ISO image from the data store, meaning we have to upload our ISO image onto this data store first before we attach it to the virtual machine. So you could actually just upload right here by clicking here, or in order to make things organized, you should create a new directory, which I have already created. You see right here, ISO image. If you do not have that, simply click on create directory, type it in ISO and click on create directory. You can pick any name that you like. So I have already picked ISO. Once the directory is created, click on it. And then you could click upload and then go to the folder which has your ISO image downloaded. This is my folder on my desktop, and this was the image. When I clicked on it, I clicked open and it started uploading to this folder. I wanted to let you know that upload could take some time. For me, it took anywhere between 15 minutes to 20 minutes. So I have already uploaded it to save time. So if you are going to go through the upload, you could pause the video right now, upload it. Once upload is completed, then come back and we'll go from here. All right. Assuming you have already uploaded, it's all done. Now you could simply cancel this. Let's go back again. So data store ISO image. We have to attach the ISO. Where is the ISO? Okay, click browse ISO images, and that's where our ISO image is. CentOS 8.5. Select. All right, make sure the status is connect power on. So it means as soon as I power on my virtual machine, it will connect to this ISO image. Click on connect here as well. So this way it will connect CD DVD drive as well, and click save. Okay, so assuming it is connected, now you could go ahead and click on power on from here, or you could right click and power on from here. It is going to power on the virtual machine. Now you could click on the console, or you could go from here console and pick whichever console that you wanted to open. You could just simply click here and it will open up the console, give us two options. Pick the first one, install CentOS Linux 8, hit enter. Now this is going to go through the boot sequence. It's going to start the installation wizard, which is software itself that will guide you through installing the entire operating system. So this could take anywhere between a minute to 5 minutes. So we'll go ahead and fast forward it. Okay, so we got the welcome to CentOS Linux 8 screen. Close this console, and then I could start open console in new window. So this is starting console in a new window. Now I could minimize this. All right, so here we have welcome to CentOS 8, English automatically selected. Click OK. Keyboard, leave it default. Installation, local media, installation destination, which is our 20 gig that we carved out. Language support, United States English. Installation software selection GUI. Server with GUI. If you want the GUI with the server, meaning most of the Linux operating systems do not require GUI. But for this lab setup, we could leave that as is. Click done. Kdump, leave it default. Default network and host name. Let's turn it on. And we're going to call the host name, the operating system, Linux 1 as well. Click apply. As soon as you click apply, it will say current host name Linux 1. That is configured on done. Root password, pick a password that you will remember for your Linux root operating system. It says the password fails the dictionary check. It is based on a dictionary word. You will have to press done twice to confirm. That's fine. Well done. Press twice. Okay, user creation. Do you want to create a user? Let's create it. I will create myself for my user. Make this user administrator. Leave it. Require a password for this user account. Pick a password. All right, same thing. We have to click done twice because the password was weak. That's fine. And click on begin installation. All right, so the installation has started. This installation could take anywhere between 5 minutes to 20 minutes. I'm going to fast forward the installation, and I'll come back once the installation is completed. Okay, finally, our Linux CentOS operating system installation has been completed, and you could go ahead and click on reboot. All right, licensing information, click here. Accept the license agreement, click done, and then finish configuration. We got the login screen. Go ahead and log in as yourself. Click on the name and enter your password, and it will take you on the desktop environment of Linux. Now, the reason you see this GUI type of environment because we picked the Linux installation server with the GUI. We have the desktop environment right here. And now if you want to open up the terminal, you could right click, but here is some welcome options. Click next, next. You could leave the location services off and skip. Start using CentOS Linux and go to activities and click on terminal. And here we have our terminal. For those of you who are familiar with the Linux operating system or command line of Linux, probably know exactly what to do from this point on. Anyway, our installation has completed. We have gone through attaching an operating system ISO image to a virtual machine and installing the entire operating system. Congratulations. Now you really know how the virtualization works on VMware environment. In this video, we are going to learn the basic virtual machine management through our vSphere client or our vSphere environment. All right, some of the things that we are going to cover, like power on, power off, and suspend of our virtual machine, then how we could access the console. Now, console access is just like as if you are plugging in a monitor or a keyboard directly to your bare metal server. Then we'll cover the actions. Within action menu, you will have a different actions that you could perform on your virtual machine. General information, which will tell you all about the resources and what is attached to your virtual machine. And last but not the least is additional feature menu. And that is when you select your virtual machine, right click on it, and you'll get the additional menu. All right, without further ado, let's power on our ESXi server if it hasn't. Then open up our browser and enter the IP address of our ESXi server so we could access it. All right, so let's open up our browser and we are going to access our vSphere environment by entering the IP address. 192.168.179.128. We'll enter the username, the password, and we are in. You could go straight to the virtual machine. Right here, you could select the virtual machine from here, or you could select from here. Once it's selected, you will get the power on option. You could go ahead and power on. And as you know, the power on is simply as if you are powering on your regular computer. Now, it is going to go start up your operating system and the virtual machine itself. Then once it's powered on, it will give you additional information to power it off, which means shutting down the virtual machine as well as its guest operating system. Guest operating system is our Linux operating system, which is running on this virtual machine. Then we have a suspend. What's the difference between suspend and power off? Well, suspend does not completely shut down your guest operating system. It will put your virtual machine on hold state, like a state that it is right now, and it will pause it and you could start it back up without having to go through the whole operating system recycling. Then reset is simply power off and power on. Then edit if you wanted to edit the resources that are assigned to your virtual machine. These are the resources that are assigned. Refresh if you have added any resources, or if you want to see the refreshed console, you could click on refresh. It will tell you the exact state right now. And the action, we'll come back to the action, but first go to console. Console, once again, as if you wanted to connect monitor and keyboard directly to your computer. If you click on this one, the first one is open browser console. This will open up a browser, but it will be embedded inside of this browser window. Open console in a new tab, which is right here. Open console in a new window, which will be on its own new window, and launch remote console, which requires you to download a client. Then monitor. This is a pre-built feature, out of the box feature from vSphere that provides you monitoring of your virtual machine. You could check your CPU status, your memory status, your I/O status of your virtual machine. If you're having issue with your virtual machine, this is the best place to come and check the performance and logs, any tasks, any notifications. All right, going back to our virtual machine. Now let's click on the actions. The action provides us the power, which already provided right here, the guest OS shutdown, and restart, meaning the virtual machine stays on, but the guest operating system, which is running inside of the virtual machine, will be started or restarted. Snapshot we'll cover later on. Console we already covered. Auto start. If I enable this auto start, it is telling the ESXi server that every time you are going to restart or you're going to be recycled or rebooted, I want you to start this virtual machine as well. So I don't have to come into the vSphere environment and start it up manually. Then edit setting. That edit setting allows you to edit the resources, add resources, remove resources. Additional functions of actions permissions. If you have an additional user in your vSphere environment and you do not want that user to view or access this virtual machine, you could go to the permissions and enable or disable. Edit notes, anything you wanted to add notes to this virtual machine. Rename if you wanted to rename this virtual machine. Help will take you to the VMware website for help and open in a new window. This is going to open another browser for your virtual machine. Now, this is about the actions. Now, you could perform the same thing by right-clicking here, and you will see all these same tasks, the same actions that you have available right here on the action menu right here. On the bottom side, here you have a general information, meaning what's your network, what's the host name that is assigned to your operating system, the IP address that is given to this operating system. Our ESXi IP address is 128. For this, we are given 129 because this is a Linux operating system as a VM inside of the ESXi. VMware tools, storage, notes, performance, summary last hour. What's been happening to our virtual machine within the last hour? On the right-hand side, hardware configuration. What is added or what's available to our virtual machine? Resource consumption. What the resource consumptions look like, what it has taken, what is the free, what is available, and all the information. The bottom one we already talked about. It is the recent task. Whatever the task that you perform on your virtual machine or any of your vSphere environment will be recorded or tracked right here on the task. So these are the few administration or basic functionality of virtual machine that you could perform right from the vSphere environment. In this video, we are going to cover virtual machine snapshots and cloning. All right, so snapshot preserves the state of the data of a virtual machine at a specific point in time. The state includes the virtual machine's power state, for example, powered on, powered off, or suspended. The data includes all the files that make up the virtual machine. Now that definition is right from the vmware.com. A virtual machine snapshot is just an image of the state and the data of a virtual machine captured and stored at a given point in time. All right, so in order to explain it in simple words, let's visualize it. So we have our virtual machine right here. Now this virtual machine, for example, has a directory, and that directory name is directory 1 or folder name folder 1. Now we take a snapshot of that virtual machine, for example, on November 1st. Now as time passed, we are in the month of December, and today is, for example, December 1st. And we have the same directory or a folder that we created as directory 1. And also, along the time, we created another directory, directory 2. Today, what happened is we accidentally deleted directory 1. Or for some reason, we lost our virtual machine completely or it crashed. Then we have a snapshot that we took on November 1st, thankfully. So what we do is we restore or revert back to that snapshot. Now, when we go back to that snapshot, you will lose the current state or current data of that virtual machine. Meaning, when you restore, you will recover your directory 1, but you won't have directory 2 because it is going back to the snapshot image that we took on November 1st, and November 1st, we didn't have directory 2. Also, if you have lost the state on December 1st and you have installed, for example, on November 15th, you installed an application. Now you lost the virtual machine and you revert or restore back on November 1st, you will lose that application as well. All right, moving on. Please note, snapshots are not backups because virtual machine snapshots basically reside on the same disk space as their parent virtual machine. A lot of people think snapshot or consider snapshot as a backup of a virtual machine, which it should not be considered that way. A backup should always reside on a separate location somewhere else, not on the same virtual machine. Snapshots is a great tool to recover a virtual machine. For developers, for example, if they are testing codes and they're changing the codes, they could always revert back and start from the beginning. In case of a crash, if your virtual machine is dead or unable to start for some reason, maybe the hardware reason or the operating system reason or something happened to the virtual machine itself, then you could always go back to your snapshot. A VM snapshot option includes, which means when you wanted to create a virtual machine snapshot, you will be given a few options. One option is name. Yes, that's the option. You have to specify the name of the virtual machine, the description of that virtual machine, memory, which is, if chosen, which it will take the snapshot of the exact state of a VM. For example, if you have a browser open at that time on your window and you take the snapshot with the memory, then when you revert back a month from now, for example, you will see that browser remain open. So that's what the memory snapshot is. And then QS. QS is actually the VMware tools is used to QS the file system in the virtual machine. QSing a file system is a process of bringing the on-disk data of a physical or virtual computer into a state suitable for backups. All right, so that's about snapshot. Real quickly, VM clone. A clone is a copy of a virtual machine. It's just that simple. As you clone, you get the option to modify the hostname and IP of the clone VM. Yes, because if you are cloning a virtual machine to another virtual machine, then it will have a same hostname and it will have a same IP. Then it will have a conflict, right? Two identical virtual machine can cause issues. So while you are creating a clone, you do get the option to modify the parameters of a virtual machine. Now, keep one thing in mind. A VM clone option is not available without vCenter. The ESXi server should be connected through vCenter in order to have the cloning feature, which means in our video, we won't be able to go through the cloning process because we are not connecting through vCenter. We are going directly to the ESXi server. So let's go into our lab environment, our vSphere environment, and see how we could take a snapshot and restore back in time. All right, first thing first, make sure you have your ESXi server up and running. Yes, it is up. Great. Now go to your favorite browser. I'm going to open up my Firefox, and I'm going to enter the IP address is 192.168.179.128. Beautiful. Input the username, the password. Excellent. All right, we're in. Beautiful. All right, so let's go to our virtual machine and let's power it on. As it's powering on, let's make sure there are no snapshots right now onto this manage snapshot. Yep, there is one snapshot that I was playing around earlier, so let's delete it and remove. The snapshot is gone. All right, so we are waiting for our virtual machine to power on. Let's give it a few seconds. Let's go ahead and log in. Once again, this virtual machine is running a Linux operating system. Go to Activities, go to Files, and on the files, I want you to go to Documents. Double click on Documents, and you will see I have a directory, dir1. You do not see it because you didn't create one, so I will go through the process with you. So I'm going to move this to trash. All right, so it's gone. Now, for example, today is November 1st. I wanted to create a new folder called directory 1 and click on create. Now let's go ahead and close the window, the console. Let's not power off the VM, just close it. Now let's go to action, snapshot, and click on take snapshot. Here, define or put in the name. I will say November 1st, just to remember the date when I created, and description if you wanted to pick a description. Snapshot the virtual machine memory. I don't want to do that. I don't want to QS the guest file system. Leave everything as is and click on snapshot. All right, right here at the bottom it says recent task, create snapshot, and the result completed successfully. Beautiful. Now I want you to go back to your Linux machine, and let's say today is December 1st. Now a month passed. Today you created another directory inside of this directory. So right click, click new folder, and then you say directory 2. Okay, beautiful. All right, we have the 2 directories. Now we working on it. We trying different things. Accidentally we have deleted the directory 1. Move to trash. All right, it is trashed. We do not have it. Now let's close it. So now we want to recover our directory 1. The only option we have is to go to a snapshot. So click on actions, snapshot, restore snapshot. Current state of the virtual machine will be lost unless it is saved in a snapshot. So if I wanted to save the current state, I could do it now. But let's say we lost it. We do want to recover our data, or we have our VM crashed. So click on restore. This is going to restore back to November 1st. And in order for it to restore, it will shut down the virtual machine. So it has shut down. Now go ahead and power it back on so you get your virtual machine operating system back online. All right, we'll give it a few seconds until it's completely online. All right, we logged in. Let's go back to our files and go to our documents where we created the folder. And right here you see we have our directory 1 again. We could recover it. However, we lost directory 2 because we lost that directory 2 at that time and we didn't create a snapshot at that point. So if you had taken a snapshot of, for example, when you were in December 1st, you could go back and forth. And also there's another option right here. You could have, you see action, go to snapshot, and you see right here it says right here consolidated disk. This would allow you to bring the data from snapshots from different point in time together into one point in time. All right, so that's about snapshots. I was telling you earlier that cloning is not available if you are connecting to the ESXi server directly. You see, if you go to action right here, there is no cloning option. So cloning option will be available once you install a vCenter and then access your ESXi server through the vCenter. In this video, we are going to learn virtual machine resource management. What are the resources? Resources are the CPU, memory, hard disk, storage controller, USB adapter, network adapter, DVD-ROM, video card, and many other peripherals that are inside of your computer or attached to the computer. Let's visualize it. We have our ESXi server and we have created a virtual machine which is running an operating system, and of course we are running some kind of application on that virtual machine. That virtual machine, when we created, we had the requirement of 2 gig of memory and 1 CPU. Over time, the workload for that virtual machine has increased, and now the requirement to have the resources added as well, meaning they wanted to add 3 to 4 gig of RAM and 2 CPU in order to run or support the application requirement properly. Now think of a physical computer or a server that you have, and you have the same requirement to add more memory, a CPU or a hard disk. You would actually have to open up your computer and add the memory DIMMs on your motherboard or CPU on your motherboard. You could add that, but what if you do not have enough control or space on your motherboard to add those resources? Then you are out of luck. Then you will have to have a new hardware, install a new operating system, install an application, and then run your application on the newer platform. Now, of course, migrating these applications over to a new hardware requires a lot of downtime, a lot of planning, a lot of man hours. With the virtualization, this problem has solved. And now that's one of the beauty of virtualization is that you could add these resources in a very minimum amount of time, or in some cases, on the fly, meaning while your computer is running, you could add those resources and your computer will not have any kind of downtime. Yes. All right. Let's go right into our vSphere environment, pick up our virtual machine, and see how we could add the resources. Here we have our ESXi server. All right, now we need to connect to our ESXi server through our browser. We'll enter in the IP address of our ESXi server, username, password. All right, this virtual machine is powered off. Now, in order to add some of the resources, the virtual machine has to be powered off. In some cases, you could add the resources as a hot add if it has certain requirement or certain hardware requirement it has met, or if it has VMware tools running. Anyway, for now, we'll keep that powered off in order to add resources. Now, on the right-hand side, you'll see the hardware configuration. The CPU, it has 1, memory 2, and 20 gig of disk. Now, let's say we want to add an additional memory from 2 to 3 gig and 1 additional CPU. So you could go to the action, edit setting, and change right here the CPU to 2 CPU and memory from 2 to simply type it in 3. That's it. If you wanted to add other resources to your virtual machine, you could do it right now. And then you click on save. Right here it says reconfigure virtual machine completed successfully. Now, if you could power on your virtual machine and you console into the virtual machine. Now, of course, this virtual machine is a Linux operating system. If it had a Windows, it would be a lot easier for you to find out the additional CPU and the memory. But for Linux, you would have to run a command to find out how many CPU or how much memory it has. But anyway, we know the commands, so stay with me and we will verify that the operating system can also now detect the 2 CPU and the 3 gig of memory. Let's go to our command line. And one of the most famous, most used command in Linux that would tell you the resource and resource usage is top command. The top command tell you the memory information right here, 2824, close to 3 gig, of course, right? And it tells you the CPU information right here, how many CPU it has, what's the load, what's the usage, all that information is in there. If you want to get the exact information of your CPU or memory, there's a command you could run. It's called DMI decode. Okay, you have to run it as root, meaning you have to be administrator. So become root. Now run DMI decode. All right, so see, it actually threw a lot of information on the screen. If you move up, go up, scroll up, you will find all the information about your memory, CPU, right here. Okay, this is your BIOS information. This is the manufacturer, base board, processor right here. This is the processor CPU 0. and you will see another CPU right here, CPU 1. See, that's how you verify in Linux operating system that you have given two CPUs. All right, the main purpose of this video is to show you how you can add or remove resources. So now let's bring it back to our original state. Let's go to setting. And if we wanted to change the resources of our Linux virtual machine while it's up and running, you'll see the CPU grayed out, memory grayed out. So for that, you have to power it off. All right, now go back to action, edit setting, and change it back to 1 CPU to 2 gig of memory. Save it. Excellent. Now you can power it back on and you will have the resources that you had earlier. Congratulations! I am so glad that we have completed this course successfully, and there were so much things that we learned about virtualization. So let's recap as to see what we have learned in this course. Well, first we started off with basics of virtualization, where we learned the virtualization terms that you should know before you dive into virtualization, the benefits of virtualization, virtualization versus cloud, the VMware and its product. Then we dived into the lab setup. That's where we designed our lab. We downloaded and installed VMware Workstation, which allowed us to create a virtual machine to install ESXi server. Then came in the vSphere ESXi management. We learned how to access the ESXi server through our vSphere web browser. We also learned how to access our ESXi server through SSH. Then we went ahead and created a virtual machine, installed the operating system. Then came in the managing of our virtual machines, and there we learned the basic management of virtual machines, how we created snapshot, cloning, adding, removing resources for a virtual machine. Now let's talk about the additional resources. If you want to learn more about VMware virtualization, I would say go to linkedin.com/learning, and you could just simply type VMware and you will find a ton of resources on VMware virtualization with many advanced topics. You could also go to vmware.com. They have a lot of resources that you could download and read up. They also have online free labs which you could use free of charge and learn a lot of new things about VMware virtualization. Now let's talk about how you could connect with me. There are many different ways you could connect with me, and the very first thing you could do is you could go to my website utclisolutions.com, and you will find me there. You will find my contact information. You could also find me on LinkedIn. Simply go to linkedin.com and put in my name. If you wanted to go directly to my page, you could click on this link. You could also join me on my Facebook group. That's a group I created where I actually share all the newer information about IT with everyone who wants to learn more about virtualization. Then the YouTube channel. There are a lot of YouTube videos that I create for my community, and those are completely free. You could go in there and you could watch all my YouTube videos. And if you wanted to request additional material that you wanted to watch, please let me know. It was definitely a great pleasure teaching you, and hope to see you soon.